When I looked up the gospel lectionary reading for this week, I got to admit, I started to get a bit nervous. And I think a large part of my nervousness is due to the fact that I really don't like preaching about money. I don't think a lot of preachers enjoy preaching about money. It's one of those topics that we're told to stay away from. Some of us get defensive when people ask us about it, especially when they ask questions that probably challenge our priorities or challenge our lifestyles. And so I found myself in sort of this place, and for all sorts of reasons, we'd rather talk about other Christian themes and topics that we think are probably easier to take in. We like to talk about faith. We like to talk about hope. We love talking about love and joy. But when it comes to things like income and budgets, when it comes to things like how we spend our money, when we come to things like how do we tithe, how do we give offerings, those things are so specific. They're so concrete and they're so private. They're things that we don't want to talk about. And we open up our passage this morning when a man approaches Jesus and he asks Jesus to judge a situation. He's having a dispute with his brother, and so he comes to Jesus and he says, Jesus, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. And it's strange when you read this story because this is the only context that we get in the passage. We don't know anything about this situation. There's no other information about this situation, just this. And when you read the man's request, it's easy to see that it's very reasonable. He's not asking for anything crazy. He's not asking to get more than his brother. He wants Jesus to advocate for his fair share, for his brother to give him what's rightfully his. But check out how Jesus responds. He says, take care. And it's like this exclamation mark. Be on your guard. Really look out for all sorts of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And it's hard not to read this and think, since when is wanting fairness the same thing as being greedy? And just when you think this passage can't get any more confusing, Jesus says more. He tells his listeners this parable. And it's known as the parable of the rich landowner, a man who collected all of his wealth before he retired, broke down his barns. He built these big storage places, and he thought to himself, I will put all the grain that I need. I'll put all the tools that I need into this barn. And the day I retire, I will get to enjoy these things. And one day he learns that he's about to die and that everything that he stored up for himself, he will no longer have the opportunity to enjoy. And the wording that the passage uses is so harsh. Jesus says, you fool. It's pretty harsh words. This very night, your life is being demanded of you. And the thing that you've prepared, the things that you've saved this entire time for yourself, whose will they be now that you're about to leave this life? Everything that you've worked your entire life for, now you will lose. And there's a million different questions that come up after reading this parable. And just for starters, I ask myself, what's wrong with planning ahead, right? What's wrong with saving for rainy days? I thought we're supposed to be wise with the way that we manage what God has given us. And just when you think that this short parable, it's only a few verses, just when you think it can't get any more confusing, Jesus ends it with a warning. He says, so it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God. What an interesting phrase, but what does it mean? What does it mean to be rich towards God? There are so many hard and uncomfortable questions in this passage, and I thought to myself, maybe the best that we can do with this week's gospel is just to wrestle with it. But for me, the biggest takeaway from this week's gospel lesson is that I need to stop assuming that my biggest concerns or the main things that I care about are the same concerns that Jesus has. Because oftentimes I tell myself that everything that really matters to me is also Jesus' number one concern. Jesus would agree. Jesus is on my side on this argument. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. Look at this man who's coming to Jesus about his inheritance. This is the biggest issue in this man's life, but it isn't the biggest issue in Jesus' eyes. For Jesus, there's something else more important than that issue. Look at the rich man in the parable. He thinks that he can do whatever he wants to with his own hard-earned money, but Jesus doesn't agree with him. Where they see in part, Jesus sees the whole. Where they see only what matters to them, only what's on the surface, Jesus sees the depths of their hearts. Where they obsess over what is temporary, Jesus is fighting hard for what lasts forever. Jesus looks at the man whose family is being broken over money, and he sees that this man is so focused, he's so obsessed about his fair share, that it's actually affecting his own heart. He's so focused on his inheritance, what belongs to him. And it's strange because he's actually right in this passage, but he doesn't see that in his pursuit for what is fair, there's a deeper issue going on. But Jesus notices this, because now the man can't even see his own brother as anything other than an obstacle or a competitor. In his pursuit for getting what is his, he's made his own brother an enemy of his, somebody that he's challenging. And he's so concerned about his money situation. This is what matters to him so much, and he's right about it, that he doesn't even notice the actual abundance of wealth that is standing right next to him. This is Jesus right in front of this man. He's so narrowly focused on his money situation that he has no room for the salvation that Jesus has. All he cares about is this situation with his brother. But right in front of him is all the riches he will ever need. But he doesn't notice it. In his greed, he reduces the Son of God to a simple estate lawyer. So often we get so wrapped up on surface level things that we become blind to the deeper matters. It's not that this situation doesn't matter. It's not that our cares and our problems and our finances don't matter to Jesus. It's not that we should just sell everything and give away everything. But sometimes we get so caught up on certain things that we forget to love our neighbors like Jesus said we should. Sometimes we try to handle situations in the right way, but we lose our way on the path of righteousness when we do so. And we tell ourselves, I just want what's mine. But we don't see what we're losing in the process. We tell ourselves, I just want what I deserve. But oftentimes we forget what we're giving up in that pursuit. Oftentimes we tell ourselves, I just want what's rightfully owed to me. But we become blind to how it affects other people. At the same time, Jesus looks at this rich landowner storing all of his riches and his wealth for his future. And he sort of sees a selfish man, a man concerned with his own power, a man focused on his own life. And notice how the rich man speaks in the parable. He says, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build large ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. You should relax. You should eat and drink and be happy. See, the problem is not that he's preparing for the future, The problem is that he only cares about his own future. He's forgotten to love his neighbor. He's forgotten God's generosity. He's forgotten God's provisions. And he's forgotten that in the face of death, we are all helpless, but for the grace of God. And you're reading this at this point in the passage, there's this temptation for me to treat this passage like a metaphor. To say this gospel lesson is not literally about money. It's about my attitude towards money. It's about my heart. It's about faith and hope and love and joy. But money is neutral. And that's kind of right, but I was thinking over this past week, it's also kind of wrong. Because the truth is, Jesus actually talks about money and possessions more than just about any other topic. And I think he does that because he knew that there's something about money that has an influence, a power to change us. There's something about it that makes us defensive. There's something about it that makes it so hard for us to hear this week's gospel in all of its risky, impolite, radical fullness. There's something about this thing that we call money and its temptation that grabs a hold of us and doesn't easily let go. And church, I don't mean to offend anyone. Honestly, what you do with your money is entirely your own business. But I'm stuck with the fact that Jesus almost surely offended this man who approached him in this week's gospel reading. The man came to Jesus with a very reasonable request involving money. And Jesus turned that reasonable request on its head. And not only did he refuse to help the man get his inheritance from his brother, he called the guy greedy. And then he sent him packing. I'm reading this and it just doesn't sit right. Why? This guy, he has every claim in the world. He has every right to get what is his, but Jesus calls him greedy and he sends him away. I think that it's saying a lot, especially for us today. Because when Jesus ends his lesson, he tells the man, and I'm coming back to this phrase repeatedly this week, to be rich towards God. He says, be rich towards God. Don't store up all your goods in a house one day, which you will never enjoy in the future. He says, be rich towards God. And it's such a beautiful and inspiring phrase, but honestly, what does it mean? What does a heart and a lifestyle, a home and a bank account rich towards God look like? I've been thinking about this week, and I thought maybe if we're listening to Jesus carefully, it means guarding against greed instead of obsessing over fairness. To make sure that you're not so right that you forget to be righteous. That you're not so focused on handling all of life's affairs like a business transaction that you miss the opportunity to be a blessing in someone's life. Maybe it means prioritizing people over profit and relationships over repayment and brothers and sisters over budgets and stock. Maybe it means holding human wisdom lightly, knowing that God's wisdom will almost always render our own wisdom foolish. In the parable Jesus tells, God confronts the rich landowner with the most chilling words. He says, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. You've stored up all of these things for yourself, but this very night your life is being demanded of you. I read these words and I wonder to myself, what would change about our financial lives if we really believed this? What would we do differently if we really believe that God does in fact demand our lives from us every single day, every single way that we live? Because God does. Because the call to take up our cross is this daily, hourly, minute by minute call. And I dare to say it's also a dollar by dollar call. That if our lives have in fact been demanded of us, then how should we live? What should we leave behind? What should we carry forward? What should we give away? He says, be rich towards God. Don't shy away. Be brave and wrestle with what this invitation means, because the richness that we spend on God is the only richness we'll keep in the end. Amen.